Okay. Well, friends, a very good evening, and this is our 15th conversation on urbanization. And as you know, normally our routine is that we just give 10 minutes to the speaker to speak in the first instance, and then we put all our questions and comments and make it into a real conversation. But this being the subject which most of us are somewhat, I would say, uncomfortable with, or we are trying to catch up with, to understand all the fast changing technology and how it impacts our lives, we made a special concession, and we'd like Dr. Rajat Kathuria, who's Director and Chief Executive of ICRIER and a known authority in terms of both his research and policy advisory roles with the government and as a consultant to several international institutions like the World Bank, ADB, ILO, a whole lot of them. We thought we'll use this opportunity to get him to spend 20 minutes to give us Internet and Cities 101. And then we'll put all our questions to you. May I request people who are sitting on that side to please come in the middle. It'll make the job of the speaker so much simpler. I'm not going to give a detailed introduction to Dr. Kathuria, partly because he's our very own. We work together at ICRIER, and Rakesh Kakkar houses us in this setup, so I don't think we need to really spend too much time, but you have the bio that was mailed to you. So without spending any more time, Rajat, why don't I ask you to start?
Thank you, Dr. Ahluwalia, Mr. Kakkar, friends. Thank you for being here. This is quite a task, trying to kind of compress in 20 minutes what is happening in internet and how we are responding as city residents as a result of that. So I'm going to go through quickly. I've prepared some slides, thankfully, thanks to some of my colleagues sitting here in the audience, Mansi and Smriti. So we've together prepared what I'm going to talk about. The essential kind of the focus of this discussion is how internet now and how mobile voice in the past really changed the way we lived, interacted, communicated, learned, and performed our task, both social and professional, in cities. And this is I think, a monumental change, and we don't even know how it's going to impact us in the future. And I'll lay out a few data points, and I'm happy to come back and talk to you about these in the questions. But first, something that will shock you, or surprise you at least, if not shock you, is that every day in the world, this is what happens in the internet kind of space domain. 207 billion emails are sent, 8.8 billion YouTube videos, 4.2 billion Google searches every day. So much of GB worth of data is exchanged, so many tweets and photos and Skype calls and Amazon purchases, etc., etc. I mean, this data, I mean, even to somebody who lives in India or in China, this is huge. And I think this is truly transformational because part of it hasn't yet begun to happen, which means that in India we don't have the kind of, as I will show you, internet ownership yet for this kind of magnitude of levels of usage that are happening in the rest of the world. When they happen in India, this will truly become a transformational moment. So this is what's happening in the rest of the world. And just for sake of illustration, there are lots of places in the globe that are not covered by internet, including in India. And Facebook and Google. I'm going to take names of entities, primarily not in terms of any commercial sense, but what they're doing in the internet domain. This is a drone which is powered by Facebook, powered by solar, and by Facebook, owned by Facebook, which is going to provide internet signals and coverage in spaces that are very difficult for ordinary fiber or even for wireless technology to exist. So this is going to literally cover the entire, so there are areas in Africa, there will be areas in Northeast, you think about archipelagos of Indonesia where it's very difficult to cover. So this is the kind of technology that is emerging, and Google's project called the Project Loon does the same thing, but instead of using a drone, it uses a balloon, and balloons are going to then cover the rest of the place where you don't have coverage. Now, very quickly, I'm not going to spend too much because there's so much to cover. I'm going to really go through very quickly the data on India. You know the data on mobile. The data on mobile, we have 1 billion plus subscribers on the mobile phone in India. But internet has been slower, much slower to take off in India. And there is a lot of potential, as I was saying. We have just about less than 30% tele-density of the internet in India, and if you break it up between rural and urban, you will see that urban is much more and rural is much lesser. I've also ranked the cities in terms of internet subscribers, but the important or interesting thing to note in India is that, one, the stylized fact is that urban tele-density, internet density is higher than rural. That's a no-brainer, obviously, given demand side and supply side. But the other interesting thing to note is that most of internet usage in India is driven by the mobile phone. So it's not driven by fixed wireless, it's not driven by fixed, but it's driven by wireless, whether it's fixed wireless or whether it is mobile internet. So that's going to be true for any kind of reasonable amount of time that you want to forecast internet usage in India. That's going to be true. I want to just mention at this point that there are some countries, like smaller countries like Korea, where they can lay out optical fiber cable to large parts and pervade it to large parts of the country where they have fixed connections and fixed broadband connections. But India is going to be driven, as I said, by wireless. How are internet users on the mobile using internet in India? And again, you'll be quite surprised that in India, on average, 11 apps a day are used by an average city resident. You spend 3 hours a day on the mobile. This has implications for productivity. But you're spending 3 hours a day on the mobile phone, and it's less than the amount of time that users in the developed world spend. This is due to a survey that happened in 2015. I don't know whether the data has changed, but I'm sure surveys that are done subsequently would bring about some changes in the usage patterns. There are more male than female users. Usage in tier 2 cities and tier 3 cities is actually growing faster, and there the consumption of entertainment and mobile video. Now, because you have I guess the reason is you have the opportunities of entertainment in tier 1, tier 3 and tier 2 cities. Those options are less than in tier 1 cities and metros. The usage of the mobile for entertainment, especially mobile video, is much higher. As I said, smartphones are driving internet. 60% of YouTube views in India are from mobile phones, and children spend more time on the internet than adults do. They spend 4 hours, which is equivalent to the time that an average US resident spends on the mobile phone. So the pattern of usage is not small, it's fairly high, it's through the mobile, and entertainment dominates. Of course, shopping is getting a boost, e-commerce, I'll talk a little bit about e-commerce, but entertainment is clearly driving smartphone usage in metros in India. There was a very nice article that appeared in The Economist a couple of years, I think 2015, I would really recommend. Very nicely written article. They called human beings, instead of Homo sapiens, Phono sapiens. This is the new kind of terminology that has emerged. The smartphone, according to them, is ubiquitous, addictive, and transformative. And it's not, the reason why this is, it's not far to see why this is happening in the rest of the world, and hopefully through the rest of the slides I'll be able to kind of at least illustrate or signal in this what is the transformative potential, both in terms of positive transformation potential, and of course there's no such thing as Pareto improvement, so there will be some downsides, but hopefully the positives are more than the negatives. Smartphone usage, why did it pick up in India? As with other things, as with the mobile phone in India, the price point was very important. Today a smartphone, you can get a smartphone for $50 or less. And in the future, you're probably going to see even lower priced smartphones come into the country. And that is driving usage. This is parallel to what happened with mobile phones. When mobile phones first came into the country, you had those very large Motorola phones that were available for 40,000, 50,000 rupees. And then they dropped to less than that Vodafone home box, which dropped to 700 rupees. And then along with other policy changes like calling party fares, just the mobile voice market just took off exponentially. And I suspect the data market, which is what we are talking about, internet, is probably poised, is on the cusp of a takeoff, because several of the things that need to happen in India are happening, which is price points for the smartphones have declined. It's a very fast growing market, so economies of scale in a market like India for technology and for smartphones is readily available, and therefore the price can fall. Other infrastructure constraints are also so huge, which means that e-commerce sites that I'm going to talk about have got a lot of traction. And Android is growing very fast, which is the platform that most smartphones use. iPhone, of course, is a closed platform. Android is the open source, open platform, and it's growing at 75% year on year in 2015. So the price points are right, Android platform, open source is growing, a lot of applications are being written for the open source. So the ecosystem around which a smartphone can grow, which is your applications, the price, the demand side, on the supply of applications, which I'm going to talk about, all that is falling into place. The one thing that I'm sure you'll ask during the question answer session is, what about service providers? Where are they in all of this? What's happening to Spectrum? What's happening to all those options? Okay, so I'll park that aside for the moment and come back to that if you have questions on that. But a lot of the parts of the ecosystem in India are happening. So, you would see, it's moving, and then you wait for it to connect, and then it would disconnect, and so on and so on. But this sound, of course, this belongs to the virtual museum now. When I was browsing yesterday, I found a lot of this is in the virtual museum. Speeds have increased in India vastly. From the 64 kbps copper lines, now we have fixed wireless, and we have optical fiber cables. Of course, that BharatNet project is still not in a state of completion where you can drive rural coverage, but today we are not talking about rural, we're talking about cities. So, speeds have also increased. Speeds of wireless access have also increased, and coming of 4G and 5G and LTE, all these technologies. And for the purpose of this conversation, all that you need to know about these technologies, and all that I know about these technologies, is that, in the higher generation, you are, the faster the speed, and the more data you can transmit in the same time period. So in 1 second, the amount of data that you can transmit with 3G, 4G, 5G, LTE, etc. Is much faster. So is much greater. So speeds are becoming faster of access. You don't have disconnections as often. I don't know whether internet will be subject to the same issue of call drops that we are associated with now today in voice calls, but internet is a much more robust, in a sense, system than the BTSs and so on, I think. So I'm going to, very quickly, I'm going to go through how in cities we're using the internet. And there are various aspects of this, and I will go through them fairly quickly, but I do want to come to the conclusion and the punchline, and then hopefully be able to address your questions. What's being used most in communication? Within communications, it's the Facebook and it's WhatsApp that dominate usage of communications. These are the two apps that dominate. And I remember many years ago when I used to teach an MBA school, a number of my students were doing a project on this new way of seeing films in India at very inflated prices compared to what it was. And everybody used to think this would be these PVR sort of establishments wouldn't survive in a price-sensitive market such as India. That was the dominant narrative at that time. And I think the dominant narrative in internet also was that the internet and these very high price, of course data prices are coming down thanks to competition from Jio that has just emerged, but even at high price data points, which is what you pay for getting high speeds and high access, people are willing to pay because of what it's doing for them. And that's what I want to illustrate. So you're willing to pay higher speeds, higher price for higher speeds of data because of what data is doing to you in your own lives. Apart from the ability to communicate, so Facebooks and the apps, the Telegram is dead, India Post struggling to survive, and has to look at newer avenues or reinvent itself to survive commercially. Travel has completely changed. And this is a dominant theme in a city today. And if you talk about emissions, if you talk about transport, you talk about mobility, you will have to talk about the shared economy. And Uber today exists in 55 countries. It's facing regulatory challenges in a number of countries, including in India. And there will always be this tussle between innovation and regulation. And that will always happen. Hopefully, over a period of time, innovation will dominate, and innovation will win. Regulation will have to come to terms with innovation. But this tussle will exist. Just like there will be a tussle between privacy and profit in the internet space, there will be a tussle between privacy and profit. There will be a tussle between innovation and regulation. And I think over time, an equilibrium will get established, but this tussle will happen. And this is what we are seeing in the city space. It exists in 55, Uber exists in 55 cities, and it has faced, as I said, regulatory challenges in 55 cities due to security, due to essential, the competitive pressure is coming from the incumbents that don't like the existence or the coming entry into the market of Uber because it is destroying profit margins. So the shared economy is what is going to dominate. And Uber and Ola represent the shared economy in mobility, and in travel it's your Oyo rooms that you're familiar with, it's Airbnb. It's becoming much easier to get demand and supply together. And that's what kind of for us in this room, I think that's what the internet has enabled. It's making it much easier for demand and supply to come together. I remember when I was in college in DC and had to travel to New York looking for a ride, I used to go to a notice board and pin up a yellow sticker and say, I want to go to New York on such and such a day. We were able to share, but sometimes it happened, sometimes it didn't happen. You're rest assured with the internet, you're never going to fail to get an opportunity to share with somebody else because everybody else also have access to the same device. And you've created these network effects out of the shared economy. It's happening in e-commerce. All these slides will be available on ICRIER's website, so I won't spend too much time going through the numbers, but e-commerce is really kind of booming in India. Again, the same thing we were thinking, just like the example I gave about PVR and its survival, you thought the same thing about Amazon, Flipkart and Snapdeal, but they're not only entrenched in the market, they're doing really well. There are these foreign multinational firms that are investing in Snapdeal, investing in things like entities like SoftBank. Alibaba has invested not only in Snapdeal, they've invested in Oyo rooms as well. So that entire space is being covered by huge amounts of resources because everyone knows that this is the future of the economy. And what is today, and we've spoken with the head of Snapdeal, who's also on our board, and the two things that are clear from this slide and from conversing with him also is that the maximum growth is occurring in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. There are tie-ups between them and post offices because you don't have addresses, so delivery happens in post office. But that's where the most rapid growth is happening in e-commerce. Where there is still a challenge is, things in cities that we are familiar with, Grofers and Nature's Basket. That hasn't yet picked up, but it has huge potential as well, according to a report that was recently done by NASSCOM. So e-commerce is, what are the drivers of e-commerce? As I said, all of this, nuclear families, urbanization, convenience, it's a pain to drive in cities today. The less spoken about the average speed of a car in Delhi, the less said, the better. It's only going to get worse unless we take some drastic action. So you have always kind of on the demand side, the convenience, the product range, the offerings, then you have high-speed internet connectivity. On the supply side, they said you're building up a good infrastructure on the VC side. There's growth of smartphones, there's growth of apps, there's growth of internet penetration, and there are varied payment options, which I'm going to come to, which is another thing which has been driven by the internet, notwithstanding the scandal that you read about this morning of the fraud in debit cards. But that's a given. That is going to perhaps happen. Internet banking, mobile wallets, digital payments, this is the next this is a part of the ecosystem that is driving the change. Paytime is so big today. It's not only become a small bank, it's also got a license for a small bank, but it's also in the business of mobile wallets, especially in rural and remote areas, people who don't have access to banking system. Paytime it kind of consummates that transaction between the buyer and the seller, even if you don't have access to mobile banking. So this is a kind of revolution. If you remember, the financial revolution through mobile really started with M-Pesa. Recall the days of Kenya, where it was very difficult to get money out, and even if you had money, you were very reluctant to carry it on your person because of the chance of theft, or burglary, or pilferage. And that's the reason. And remittances were a big problem. And a dysfunctional banking system and the risk of theft and pilferage led to the growth of M-Pesa. And this is a revolution or a change that happened not in a developed country. This is an example that I keep giving of reverse innovation. This happened in a developing country like Kenya, albeit it was done by Vodafone and Safari.com, but it's a kind of an example of a reverse innovation that happened in a developing country, an emerging market, and then spread back to the developed world. But this is, there are risks. There is no doubt there are risks in financial transactions, but there's huge amounts of convenience and the possibility of having financial inclusion. The transactions, etc., are there for you to see, the number of transactions, but the digital payments industry is going to reach $500 billion according to Boston Consulting Group, and I've cited that report, and it will contribute as much as 15% of the GDP. No single industry contributes that huge amount to the GDP of our country. I mean, the closest that you would come think about automobiles, which is less than 5%, even telecommunication itself, which is less than 3%. The digital kind of mobile industry, payments industry would reach 15% of GDP. That's a large amount. It's also a reflection of the kind of inadequacy of the financial architecture within the country that this industry is able to prosper so much. But that's the kind of... I'm going to...
I think this can be picked up in the interaction session.
So there's this matrimonial side. Yes. There's one, those of you who are of my age, or close to my age, and lived in Delhi in the 80s, would have heard of Arora ji, Professor Arora. That's right. He's gone. He's history. His daughter is running the business. I did a check, and he's using an internet for their selfies, and there's of course education. There's jobs and employment, the sites on jobs and employment that internet enables. And I've already spoken about the shared economy in which internet will be connected to each other. Your fridge, your microwave, your car, your house, everything will be connected. A Fitbit will tell you when you have to take your medicine and whether so there's more of an emphasis on preventive as far as health applications are concerned, which are available through the mobile.
If I may suggest, I think you can pick up these things on the questions, because people must be having questions in their mind. Okay. And the slides are available. Slides are available. Yeah.
So I am going to conclude now, and just one comment on the negative aspects, which is kind of data privacy versus profit, which I already spoke about. So privacy is an issue. In India, the Global Transparency Report says that Indian law enforcement agency made 3,452 requests to get access to user data, and so privacy becomes an issue, not only commercial sale of information, but also government making use of information that is available. The dark side, children using too much of the internet There is a decline in productivity, at least in the GDP statistics, because Kodak and all have been killed as a result. There's no Polaroid, there's no Kodak. You took 1.5 trillion photographs in the world in 2015 without being impact on GDP. Productivity has increased. There's digital distraction. How many of you at work spend more than 1 hour on the email, on your smartphone, etc.? You're destroying productivity and so on. So what's the internet going to look like in India? Space. What happens when you kill internet in places like Kashmir? We're doing research in ICRIER today to estimate the opportunity cost of shutting down the internet. It's been done in the rest of the world, not in India. We will bring out this study hopefully early next year. What is the cost of shutting down the internet? Economic cost of shutting down the internet. And we'll use examples from India and try and estimate that cost. Thank you very much for your patience.
Okay. Now from the macro to the micro, which is the expectation here. So now we have to bombard Dr. Kathuria with questions on how do we be part of this change. It's all very well to talk in terms of these large numbers, but how do we change the systems by which we begin to adjust to that? So I thought this is the opportunity where we can really get answers to our queries. Please, introduce yourself.
Hello, myself is Vishal Arora. I am an educator. मेरा क्वेश्चन कथुरिया सर से है. Sir, there is a term VC funding. Sir, VC stand for? Thank you.
There's a question here.
My name is Asim. 100 Walmart stores got closed because of this internet sales. Loss of employment. In Germany, a girl has 2,000 friends, and for 17 years she has not moved out of the room, and she has not met anyone. Okay? It will create such a big mental this thing. Now, when Sahara got indebted to 40,000 crores, people knew where at least the office is. When this Paytm and other banks will run off with billions, people even won't know whom to catch and where to catch. What I am trying to tell is frauds. How will you check? All of the terrorists, the messages are coming on the internet, right? Their communication system has become so advanced that we are facing that. There is no check that a decent person is using or indecent person is using. Then there was one more thing. I think
We got
this
the point. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very good question. Thank you. Yes, please.
No, so we have to. You have to explain, sir.
No, he will.
Thank you.
He's taking notes. He will. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I am architect Gulmohar. So I just want to know, have you studied this index of living? How this indices of living have changed? Whether there is sadness, happiness, has it increased after the internet use?
Yeah.
I just want to know that.
Yeah. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Rohit. I am a journalist. I wanted to ask him that what is the impact of e-pharmacy on the healthcare system? Would it be like safe, or would it be like unregulated and a lot of misuse would take place? Thank you, sir.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I would like to compliment Dr. Kathuria for excellent presentation in such a brief time. Yes, there are so many questions one could ask on this. First and foremost is the divide, the rural-urban divide. But I think the implications of that as a follow-up to the question that was just asked as well. The second is, I will have briefly, if we go by this Internet of Things, the way they're coming in, do we need capital cities at all? Secretariats, do we need secretariats at all in the coming years? Do we need huge capital? Chandrababu is building a huge capital city. There is digital cities, digital secretariat, digital capital is what we need, not structured capital cities that is being planned. And then of course the unemployment issue that is being talked as a follow-up of this unemployment. that is going to be a fallout of this, the part of what you mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Rajesh Malhotra, Dr. Kathuria. The one thing that's troubling in my mind is this sense of increasing automation versus the thought of the number of people we're going to get who will be unemployed in the market every single year. How do we, and that's the question that Mrs. Ahluwalia was talking about, how do we adjust this thought?
Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Rahul Sharma from Genesis versus Marstella. It was a wonderful presentation. So my question is, what's your take on the policy and regulatory framework and architecture in India with respect to internet? Over the last 2 years, we've seen a number of policies come out. As a public policy person, I do see people who are drafting policies have absolutely no idea of how the space operates. There is a sense of urgency as well. We look at e-commerce, how much we have sort of moved, flip-flopped and tried to get a hang of it. Similarly with digital payments, there are a number of committees, initiatives. What are the key things that you see with respect to the policy and regulatory framework? I'm talking very broad, but what's your take on that?
Sure. There's a question here, and then one there. Then we make 10, so we can give you a chance.
Rajat, that's a wonderful presentation on the Internet of Cities. In fact, your last slide is very interesting, and I was just looking at it. I realized that all the sectors out here are typically the sectors which are the soft regulated sectors. So is it that the Internet actually develops best when the regulation is softer? The other part is that with Internet, the Internet of Cities as you're talking about, people essentially with the number of hours that they're spending per day, are they essentially becoming citizens of organizations rather than geographical entities? And does it change the governance paradigm very strongly? For instance, am I a citizen of Facebook or am I a citizen of, say, a particular city like, say, Jaipur? Thank you.
There is one.
Good evening to the panelists and Dr. Kathuria. I'm R.K. Verma. I'm running an NGO in Himachal Pradesh. Most of the time we find there is no internet facilities, even though everyone is claiming communication is far most good and it's very strong. But most of the time we found it's not working. And the same thing, the call drop is also there. So this thing ultimately being paid by the consumer. So what kind of policies being chalked out for these kind of things? Second thing is we are becoming more and more technological oriented people. Somehow I think I'm of the same age where I have seen the EFT system when introduced in India, electronic fund transfer. Earlier we used to go to the bank along with a token, and we used to sit there for hours and hours to get 50 or 100 rupees. Now the change I am finding in the technology, the boy gets a card, even though it's good, gets in, comes out, another old man like me goes in, it takes 10 to 20 minutes because we don't know how to operate. Nobody is teaching us. The person standing outside, he loses patience. He simply says, come out, you don't know how to operate it. Now these are the common things which are going along with the technology. It is creating a distance of human beings, it is coming nearer to the technology. So because we are becoming more of robots rather than human beings. That's what I wanted to know. What are things being done for this area? Thank you.
So with that, let me turn it over for the first round to Dr. Kathuria, and we'll come back with the second round.
Thank you for those. Sorry? Thanks for those wonderful questions and difficult questions. This was a question. There's a theme in the questions. I mean, macro theme which relates to jobs and employment. And what technology is going to do to jobs, and within technology, of course, what ICT technology, internet and mobiles are going to do to jobs. I wish I had an answer to the question. So much has been written about it in the recent past, both in, academically. There's the future of jobs is a theme that is being researched by a number of people. Popular media has written about it. It's been written about by academics, and they've looked at data from 200 years. Since every time there's a technological shock, you see there's this risk of disruption and there's risk of displacement of jobs, and then somehow the economy finds a way. But they say, like the title of Rogoff's book, that this time it's different because this time the shock is much deeper and perhaps much more pervasive because it's a technology shock, which is very different from the earlier kinds of shocks. But so the question is, I worked in TRAI in the formative years of TRAI, and I just want to leave you with a thought and with something that was happening at that time. VSATs, you remember VSATs were emerging at that time, which were the kind of way that you could transmit kind of signals between difficult areas, between difficult terrains, and it is what many of the news channels used for transmitting signals and for their broadcast in difficult areas. And when VSATs were emerging, a lot of people were investing in VSATs. Suddenly TRAI decided that it was going to reduce, in its wisdom, it's going to reduce the price of leased circuits, which are kind of a quasi-substitute for VSATs, these satellite small aperture terminals, and by 90%. What used to cost 10 lakhs to get a leased circuit from one point to another would now cost less than a lakh. It would cost less than a few thousand rupees. There was a huge reduction, and a lot of these VSAT operators who had made huge investments came up to TRAI and said, "You're going to kill us if you do this, and you should let the price of VSATs remain high." In a sense, protecting a market or protecting a technology through a means that was artificial. And that's the point I'm making. Now, I'm happy to say 20 years down the line that VSATs survived a revolution in the country. I don't want to simplify the question really that has been asked. It's a difficult question. It's not an easy question to answer. But I can raise counter questions, which is, do you want to protect something that is going to die out naturally in the market? I mean, maybe you don't want robos driving cars because in India, because there will be drivers driving cars. And as Hal Varian says in one of his articles, the randomness introduced on the streets of India by drivers will make driverless cars completely a non-starter, non-sequitur in India, because you never know how people are going to drive. But keeping that aside, it will take time for technology to mature and establish itself in a country like ours. But I don't think it's even the right way to say that we have to shun technology or shun the change that is happening in the market. Of course, there will be market failure. There's a role for the government. Protection. It's easier said. I know it's easy to say it here. I mean, social security infrastructure needs to be put in place in India so that and reskilling and retooling needs to be done. Because protecting a particular technology will be a very short term and perhaps regressive in the long run. So that's the only thing that I would like to say on jobs and employment. And I'm not trying to duck the question, but we will come back to you because we are going to start a project on jobs and technology in ICRIER and what's going to be the future of jobs, and hopefully come back to you on this in a few months with some initial kind of stylized facts and data. I'll take the kind of macro questions first. Is there an index of happiness after the introduction of internet? I really don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know whether internet adds to happiness or detracts from happiness. I really can't. You can come up with both, potentially both answers, right, depending on who you survey. If you survey people in their 60s and 70s, you'll probably come up with a certain answer. If you survey teenagers, you'll probably come up with a certain answer. If you get a perfectly balanced sample, I don't know what you'll come up with. But no, I don't think there's been a kind of an index of happiness that has been done as a result of the introduction of the internet. E-pharmacy, can e-commerce use e-pharmacy? I don't know. Over the counter, perhaps the Snapdeal got into some problem. I don't know the details of that. Many companies have got into trouble as a result of this. I don't know whether prescription drugs will ever be allowed to be. I mean, just a regulatory framework needs to be put in place. I mean, what are you doing essentially? You're replacing a bricks and mortar entity from to a virtual entity, and you have to prevent fraud or people who don't should not be having access to a certain drug shouldn't get it, and some measures should be put into place. But essentially what you're saying is replacing virtual presence with bricks and mortar is being replaced by virtual presence. I hadn't planned on talking about the rural-urban divide because this is more of an urban conversation. But as I said in my first slide, there's a big kind of gap between urban penetration and rural penetration. Not only in internet, but also it continues in mobile telephony, in voice telephony. And interestingly, it's the area that needs the most access to an infrastructure that will enable access to more information. I mean, that's the kind of irony of it. Where would rural infrastructure or NOFN kind of infrastructure be the most, where would you get the most bang for your buck in some sense? If NOFN in India, the National Optical Fiber Network, I'm sorry, I was speaking like a telecom, the National Optical Fiber Network, if were to reach the panchayats as Mr. Sam Pitroda had dreamed of 10 years ago with 2 Mbps connectivity, then it would potentially transform rural areas, which desperately needs access to not only digital infrastructure but other infrastructure. But getting access would enable them to come onto the mainstream much earlier than, and I must add that there is a lot of demand for infrastructure in digital infrastructure in rural areas. It's just that the supply side hasn't been able to reach that, and it will be a while before the supply side will be able to go there, because without the NOFN infrastructure in place, it's going to be very difficult to get everybody on board to the digital or to the internet, because that is an essential, I think, input, because rural areas have lower density, they're more spread out, so they need the public sector kind of investments there so that the private can then ride on creating demand in the rural areas. Shubhamai asked two interesting questions. Have we seen, I haven't kind of looked at that, I haven't thought about that. Is internet thriving in sectors that are softer than in sectors that are more hard to penetrate? It could, I mean, if you go back to, in fact, when Dr. Ahluwalia was in ICRIER, working in ICRIER, I remember she often talks about this project that we had done comparing India's anti-sector, and if I get it wrong, please intervene, success. What were the drivers of success of India's IT sector? And the Chinese were very keen to know. And we were studying their manufacturing sector, and they were studying our IT sector, and we were doing this project in ICRIER. And one of the strong conclusions of that project was that India's IT sector succeeded because there was lack of government. There was lack of government regulations. And
the government wasn't looking that way.
And so I think.
That way. It was designed by Rajiv Gandhi in that particular fashion. Open market actually success comes from.
Right. So, it could well be true, but this is something which is worth exploring, the interface between how a sector is doing and regulation and the penetration of internet in that sector. But e-commerce or kind of retail has been regulated. It's not that retail wasn't regulated. FDI and single brand retail has only recently been allowed. It's not that there was no regulation, but it's an interesting thought to explore, through hypothesis and through data, is whether internet is succeeding in sectors where there is softer regulation. But it's an interesting idea. But I've given you a kind of result from another research which suggests that you may well be right. Are we citizens of Facebook or citizens of the city? There was a slide here which I didn't show, which Smriti had, or maybe it's there. Smriti had prepared. It's there. So this is something that this research is how virtual kind of spaces are changing physical spaces. How presence in virtual spaces is changing, or technology is changing your presence in physical space. I don't know much about this research because this is being done outside of India, but what they're saying essentially is that you could be present. You go to a restaurant and you hear live music, which is what the left-hand side picture is showing you. You're listening to one person who's singing, or you're listening to a common album in the jukebox, and everybody is listening to the same thing. And then you have all these smartphone kind of armed young people sitting in a cafe with headphones and listening to completely different, whatever they want to listen to. So, spaces, public spaces are getting redefined as a result of access to technology and how virtual spaces exist. So, but I can say that public spaces will get redefined as a result of mobility that I spoke about, as a result of how we interact, how we communicate. There's interesting research that is happening in Harvard, which suggests that the need for travel will be obviated as a result of telepresence. The technology has become so, and the need for travel will become redundant, and you don't need to travel because that technology is becoming so mature and so robust and so good. When you're talking to somebody, it actually feels that the person is present in the room. But Ricardo Hausmann, who's doing this research in Harvard University, who's leading this research in Harvard University, actually has a different view, hypothesis which is different. And correct me if I'm wrong, Smriti, the hypothesis that he has is that while you're present there, you're not able to bond as well with the person if you're physically present, and you can't make out what you could if you could. Body language is an important communicator, according to him. And if you can't tell and you can't tell through body language in a telepresence conversation what the person is actually feeling. So that's a hypothesis. This research is beginning to take place in Harvard, and Ricardo Hausmann is leading this study. But it's a kind of interesting study. What are the policy and regulatory architecture? I guess one of the things that you have in mind when you ask that question is, I think, net neutrality is probably one question that you have in mind. Privacy, financial transactions, encryption of data. What is the government kind of response or the regulatory architecture to these changes that are happening? And a macro question, and Mr. Govind is sitting here who worked with dating, maybe he could add to this, is that for a start, the kind of regulatory architecture in this space in India is still very fragmented. And so there's dating, there's DOT, then there's TRAI, and of course then you have the dispute settlement body. So and this is technology that is affecting multiple kind of players in the regulatory space. So the institutional system has yet to adapt and create a kind of unified policy with respect to many of these things. Take net neutrality. Sometimes TRAI gives out a regulation, sometimes it's DOT or the specialized committee, and we don't have a policy yet on net neutrality, although we're kind of in the 2 years that we've been debating this and consulting this, we are much closer to a solution now than we were in the past. What we agreed to is that there's going to be no throttling, there's going to be no blocking, there's going to be no paid prioritization, but it's not clear yet whether price discrimination of data services will be banned for all times to come, or whether price discrimination of data services will be allowed in some form as it is in some, I'm talking about Facebook, basics, etc. So the net neutrality sphere, I think we made some progress in the sense that despite the fragmentation of the institute, made some progress and we are much closer to a solution than we were in the past. But net neutrality is something that I think will continue to be debated even after the policy is in place, because implementation will be a challenge as well, I think. And the interesting thing I wanted to say about net neutrality is that the very media that that we are talking about, this virtual space, this very media became a very powerful medium for voicing opinions in favor or against net neutrality. So the Facebook itself, the AIB YouTube video that you must have seen that had very strong positions in favor of net neutrality and against the monopolization of the internet that they feared would happen if we gave the internet up to big companies to dominate this space. So, I mean, and Facebook itself used its medium to try and create opinion in favor of internet.org and later in favor of free basics, because it would get access to a number of people who were not on the net, and then they could decide what they wanted to do on the net. So I think the discussion on net neutrality, as I said, is much closer to completion. And you can't say the same thing on privacy of data. You can't say the same thing on financial architecture. And the reason on privacy is because I'm told that the Information Technology Act needs to be kind of updated. It's 2000, I think, the Information Technology Act. A number of the things that are happening in privacy, we are drawing, kind of inspired, we are drawing from the laws or the right to freedom that are kind of enshrined in the Constitution, but this needs to be kind of upgraded. It is nobody's claim that privacy should not be respected. I think it is everybody's claim that if you're going to have access to personal information, it should be as difficult as possible to get that, and only on very robust grounds they should be able to get access to personal information. Otherwise, you should not get access to personal information, and those grounds have to be defined really strongly and well. For financial transactions, I mean, this fraud, it's like, these will happen. You just have to minimize the risk. A lot of, I was discussing with Shubhamar before coming in. There are a number of companies that now provide, specific firewalls for banks and financial institutions. This security architecture has been outsourced because it's become very complex and complicated. A number of the companies that run banks don't have the capability to actually devise those firewalls themselves. They often outsource that information. So you have to now not only secure the bank, you have to also secure the company that is building the firewall for the bank. So both have to be secured. And I think that is something that is being done in India. Now, encryption of the data that used to be 56, and I know somebody who talks about this and loves to talk about this, who's been kind of, we consult with him a lot. He says from moving from 56 to 128 was a gargantuan challenge in India, but we moved to 128-bit encryption. Moving beyond that will be a bigger step and a much more difficult step, I think. But it will give you more security, but it will be very costly to implement. What is the policy on? So there's one last question, and I'm afraid, do you need capital cities at all? Or do you need, cities of the size of these sprawling? We're doing another research in ICRIER that will be released on the 29th of November, and you're all please invited for that. We try and kind of shed some light on sprawling cities versus more compact, coordinated. In another research that we are doing, we are saying that, and this is Isha's area, so if you want to talk about, so more compact, more coordinated, more connected cities generate more GDP than cities like Atlanta that are sprawling and people live very far away. They detract from creation of GDP. So that's so that is something that we know from global research, that Atlanta is a worse city to live in than Barcelona, and that's the example is compact versus sprawling cities. if you throw internet into the mix, and I don't think internet was an input explicitly into the research that was done, it was more mobility, more kind of transit-oriented sort of development, and people in America were subsidized fuel, driving big cars, coming from faraway areas to work in the city and then going back, as opposed to a city which has good public transport and walk to work, which was Barcelona. I don't think internet was thrown into the mix, but it's an interesting question. Would you ever build a capital like Naypyidaw that you have built in? If you were to start planning today, will you ever build a capital like Naypyidaw? I don't know if any of you know this capital of Myanmar now. Would you build that? I mean, it's just sprawling, wide boulevards, of course, to ease movements of security personnel, designed on the likes of Paris. But given internet, would you design that kind of a city? I don't know. Maybe no.
So Rajat, this really has been even more than what we had expected when we asked you to speak. I think there is so much gap in our understanding on what this beast is, the internet, and how to use it. But I do think very wisely you actually evaded some of the questions about what it means for the index of happiness, index of loneliness, what kind of a city, what does it do to our memory, which now our memory cells are being revived because of the call drops, because we are back to the landlines. The honest truth is that as Rajat's presentation showed very clearly, it's a very powerful tool, and what we make of it depends on where we choose to strike a balance. And it's certainly a different thing from what we are used to, but the same tool could actually transform cities and environments and countries in a very positive way, or it could be used to kill some of our, instincts, human relationships, and how you evolve music together rather than each sitting. So all of that. But I think the part that I'm very impressed with is that while giving us all the macro picture, when it came to the conflict at the micro level, you really showed us that, that depends on us, on the regulatory systems, on how we communicate, how we educate people. So really, I do thank you, but the final word will be Mr. Kathuria, please.
Thank you, Rajat, for coming and talking to us and spending a lot of time on the presentation to put together this wonderful set of slides and information. The bio that has been circulated by ICRIER has one gap. I don't know how many of you know that Rajat is a very enthusiastic table tennis player. And yes, national level. And so we call him every year for our annual Habitat Center table tennis tournament, which we have every year. And every year he tells us equally fascinating stories about table tennis, just as he's told us the story about the internet. So thank you very much, Rajat, for coming today. And thank you, Dr. Ahluwalia, as always. You have been leading this Urban Conversation series. I think it's the longest ever series that we've had in the Habitat Center. And such a wide variety of topics, speakers from different backgrounds. It's been a truly enthralling series. And we do hope that the next in the series will be now in December, So we do hope to see you all with the same enthusiasm and interest as you all shown today in the very interesting questions that all of you threw up. And with these words, I would like to thank everyone once again for coming, and we look forward to carrying on this conversation with you in December.